Decibels and the War Dead. Let's say, for the sake of conversation, death has a sound intensity of 50 decibels. Now, I understand that some deaths are as violent as roaring traffic, an explosion, or a gunshot. But then a large portion of deaths are also quiet, aren't they? A whisper in a hospital, a low sob, or a simple release of exhausted breath. 50 decibels is the volume level of a typical conversation. A doctor informing a widow, a husband comforting a wife, the sound of death. Let's say we decide to have one conversation about one Iraqi death. And let's say we want to then take this conversation and magnify it to represent the 100,000 verified and possibly over 1 million total Iraqis who have died since our country invaded their country. How loud would we have to talk to pay our respects? How loud would we have to talk for anyone to listen? A decibel is a logarithmic unit, meaning that increases are measured exponentially. An increase of 10 decibels actually multiplies sound by a factor of 10. But since loudness is a psychophysical perception, perceived loudness only doubles every 10 decibels. If we want to take one conversation about one Iraqi death and magnify it to represent all Iraqi war deaths, we would have to increase the conversation by 6 factors of 10, because 1 million has 6 zeros. This would raise the conversation to 110 decibels, or about the sound of a loud baby crying. This is increasing the actual sound from a discussion about one Iraqi who died to a discussion about all Iraqis who have died due to our voluntary war of aggression. This is going from talking with another adult about one death to crying like babies about 1 million deaths. Now, what if we wanted to increase the perceived sound? What a person interprets as a doubling in sound every 10 decibels. Well, that should be easy. We would just have to figure out how many times we'd have to double one death until it surpassed 1 million deaths. As it turns out, the 20th doubling brings us to about 1,050,000 war dead. So that means we would have to add 20 increments of 10, 200 decibels, in order to represent the perceived change in volume from the discussion about one Iraqi who died to the discussion about 1 million Iraqis who died because our country invaded their country in a voluntary war of aggression. This gives us a 250 decibel conversation, over 100 decibels past the pain threshold for humans. This is about the sound level of the atomic bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima. 16 square miles of that Japanese city were disintegrated by the equivalent of 20,000 tons of TNT. The blast left a crater in the ground about 6 football fields wide by 1 football field deep. It's a lot of decibels. And that's probably why people still don't hear the Iraqi war dead. Because although to raise a conversation about one Iraqi death to the level required to encompass all Iraqi deaths, one would simply have to cry out loud. It would take a nuclear force to overcome the perceptions of our society. The magnitude of this type of conversation would be far beyond our threshold for painful self-reflection. I guess that's why we don't talk about the war dead. I guess that's why they remain unheard. So I really like this one. This is, I don't know, you would call this an essay. Decibels and the War Dead. This is trying to reach people. Trying to put injustice, travesty of war into a conversation, a narrative. So learning that it's not just facts that will bring peace and end injustice, brings names to the nameless, shames to the shameless, justice to the unjust, bring the unjust to justice maybe. We have to figure out a way to reach people. And I love this way to reach people. I love the metaphor. This is what writing is, I think. Is not just a good idea, but a good idea well executed. Let's get people talking about the war death. Let's bring the humanity back to the dead who are being stripped of their humanity by such phrases as "we don't count the dead." We don't count the dead of our enemies. They're fucking human beings. I don't count you as my leader who would dehumanize anyone, including my enemy. If I have an enemy, it's because they pose me an existential threat. And just because someone threatens me doesn't mean that they're stripped automatically of their humanity, because that's not the philosophy by which I live. I can defend myself, and I can even still kill while respecting the threat. I don't have to dehumanize, well, they're not humans, but I don't have to objectify my prey when I hunt. There's plenty of native traditions, and I think the best modern American hunting traditions respect their prey. You kill with respect. That's something that when I translated the Tao, I said, bleed when drawing blood. When you kill an animal, you give respect for its life. You might have decided that you're worthy of taking its life, and then now you're going to take its meat as power, or you're culling, and in order to keep their population in check, we have to kill some of these, which is that's obviously a way to manage nature, and one that we need to do more of in certain areas where the wolves are coming back, or they let you cull bears, or some of these other animals, the deer even, because they overpopulate. They're like rabbits, right? But you don't have to call a deer a monster in order to kill it ethically. Why do we have to call our enemies of war monsters in order to act like these wars are ethical? It's actually the opposite. If your leadership is asking you to objectify your enemy in war, then that is a huge red flag that that's not really your enemy, and they're looking for an excuse in order to antagonize two parties against each other, which normally don't have a natural antagonism. The only defense of war, ethically, is existential, that someone poses an existential threat. That's why George Bush had to say the nuclear smoking gun in the form of a nuclear mushroom cloud. He, as long as people like me are on this earth, is going to be accountable for those words. Colin Powell going before the UN with false intel. I think I said this in an earlier video. Men of honor have long memories, and we just haven't been connected with each other, and we haven't put in a position in order to hold these people accountable. But just the same as you have a lot of anxiety and fraying of our social fabric, you also have, I believe because I run across them, really good people out there with really good ethics and morals who are just waiting for something to join, so that way we can give these people the comeuppance they deserve. This is me just trying to, when I read this, it gets me that motivated and that empowered. Putting it in this perspective is we just need to have that nuclear conversation, and that's what the artist does. He's able to, and that's why I say emotions are compact thoughts perhaps. He's able to put that, he's able to share that lump in the throat that Robert Frost talks about, the beginning of every poem. And he puts it in a vehicle that is universally translatable, or as close as you can get, because maybe there's no art that is universal or universally appreciated and accepted by all. But the closer you get to that, the higher you go in the status of art, I believe. And not to say that pop culture, like just popular art is the best art, but lasting art. Not just popular, but lasting. And if we can take that injustice, which began in 2003 when we invaded Iraq for merely the selfish interests of the cabal of a few Americans and the benefits of those corporations and corporations around the world who are all feasting on the carrion. There's international corporations feasting in Iraq, not just Americans. Let's not be naive. This is, our economic system works internationally, and when we do things like this, that's why the international community goes along with us, because the same patterns we're being preyed upon here in the United States. You don't think Germany's being preyed upon? When you hear about the German politics and how Merkel is trying to bring the far left back to the center. So all of our politics are being preyed upon by these corporatists who we were opposing at the World Trade Organization at the late 90s, who we were opposing at the turn of the 20th century. There were humanists, there were people who believed in human ideals and human values, saying that the writing's on the wall. The movie The Metropolis, when we first came out with motion pictures, was warning us of a mechanized future. You hear Charlie Chaplin later on and make a video with his speech. Anna, look up, his speech at the end of The Great Dictator. Machine men with machine hearts. Don't give yourself to brutes. Men who despise you, who'd use you, abuse you. I should memorize that. It's a great speech. Every single word he says. Why was that his first talkie? Because he had something worth saying. Why did Hitler steal his mustache? Because Hitler was stealing the most popular narrative, the drapings of the most popular narrative at the time. Why, if you look at Trump propaganda being disseminated right now, you might not know this unless you look into it. And I have family members who are being preyed upon by this, so that's why I know about it. And I hear it, and it's almost too ridiculous for me to even take seriously, but you have to take it seriously because it is highly effective, very expensive propaganda. It's very mature vehicles of deceit. And you do it a disservice. You don't want to underestimate your enemy. They paid a lot of good money. They paid a lot of money for this data in order to know how to best manipulate and influence their base, and they're doing it. And so when you listen to it, it's effective. Because I've had discussions with my folks and other people. It's reaching people, but they're not taking Charlie Chaplin's mustache now. They're taking what I talk about the CIA and their role in empire, and when we criticize the Bush administration and Hillary is a corporatist who sat on the board of Walmart, who's a very self-interested power broker, they're taking those facts and playing with it. So they're covering Trump propaganda with pieces of reality which don't have currency in the dominant narrative. So they're actually very powerful because no one's saying this stuff. So when Trump goes after George Bush for not protecting us and it was his fault that the Twin Towers fell, well, there are a lot of criticisms, a lot of intelligence that Bush ignored. Even if you're not a 9/11 truther, which I proudly claim to be, that was the beginning of the internet, was that all 9/11 truth means was that we don't know the truth, and we would like to know the truth, and we side with the victims' families in asking for a new investigation because the first one was faulted. And the victims' family said as much too, the victims of 9/11, that the fix was in, we don't know the truth. This was never about searching for the truth, it was about a cover-up. What that covered up, we don't know. And that's where the 9/11 truth movement goes off the rails when people try to provide an answer. That's not how you conduct an investigation. We know enough now to know that the investigation wasn't conducted properly. And then you stop right there. So you don't go and you try to have sex with the girl on the first date. We just know enough to want to further that conversation. And we know that something's up. But in Trump's propaganda, he's borrowing some of that. He's borrowing some of the corporatist, anti-corporatist rhetoric. He's borrowing some. It's really interesting. And since they borrow it and repurpose it, the hypocrisies and lies and it's evidently self-contradictory. But that's why I'm reading about authoritarians and their followers right now, because it's not by logic that you reach these people, because they've long since divorced themselves from logic. How many Christians read the Bible? They say that the Bible is the Word of God, but that's not really what they're talking about. What we're talking about is fear of the unknown, fear of death, and fear of a scary world, and then ways that people comfort themselves in the face of that fear through belief systems. And political belief systems are just as strong and just as delusionary as religious belief systems, but you don't talk people out of going to church. You try to offer them better tools to explain the world and better tools to mitigate the fear in their life. But this right here, I believe has a place in that discussion, because it's a very powerful metaphor, and it ties together Iraq with Hiroshima, and I just love stuff that works out in a logical way, where the math works out. I had to look this up. I was like, I got the metaphor. This might be a Stony idea. It's one of the reasons why you smoke weed. Look at things from a different perspective. Noam Chomsky, in one of his books, when he talks about weed, is like, I can't really speak critically of it because I hired some construction guys and they were doing some carpentry for me, and they ran into a problem. They took a break, a lunch break. They smoked a joint. They came at it from a different angle and they solved the problem. He says he understands how it could be a creative problem-solving tool. I believe that psychedelics, and weed is a low-grade psychedelic, is a different way to access different parts of your mind, and it's a practice when used responsibly. I'm not running for any. Well, no, I am. I'm running for president, but I don't care about what people think about my personal practices. Being anarchistic, libertarian, it's not up to other people what I do with my consciousness. You see the results. You see that I'm a highly functioning individual. That's all that should matter to other people. But this was a really great metaphor. I might have gotten it when I was stoned, but I was like, all right, so what is perceived sound and actual sound? And I found out through researching. I mean, I said it. That's good art that's pretty much the point to which I aspire with all of my works. This is one of the most complete out of everything, even though it's only an essay, because I wouldn't add any words to it. I wouldn't change it. Maybe when you do that, there's different types of editing. So maybe if I did a fine-tooth comb editing, or I give it to someone else, maybe some of the phrasing could be different, or maybe there's some grammatical errors. But on that just below final edit, I wouldn't add or take away any words, and that's when it's done. Art should be the final say, because just logically it'd be annoying to have an artist come back and revising all the time. Ahem, Kanye, You should, when you make something and make your peace with it, be done, and that should be the final word on what you said. If you want to repurpose it later on, great. That's kind of why people are hating these reboots too, though, because it's a lack of creativity. It lowers yourself as an artist. So I just really like where this was. So increase of 10 decibels actually multiplies the sound by a factor of 10. It's a logarithmic unit. Another logarithmic unit is earthquakes. So every, a 5.0, a 6.0, that's a 6.0 isn't 20% more than a 5.0. It's 10 times stronger. That's why it's so big. Like the huge one in Alaska way back when, it was like a 9.0 or 11.0. We had a 7.0 over here that dropped freeways in the 90s when I was young, in LA. A 9.0 isn't a couple orders more than a 7.0. It's 100 orders more, 100 times stronger. Of course, that's going through the earth. It's energy waves, so it's also dissipating faster. So sound apparently works the same way. These are orders of. So that type of logarithmic unit was a nice metaphor to convey that emotional punch that, like, you should still care about one person dying and one injustice, but we're not caring about 1 million. But human potential is exponential as well, far beyond a logarithmic unit. So to give you that image, that like as you see exponential growth in these logarithmic units compared to just normal perceived growth, and then also there's a nice metaphor there too, is how do we deal with travesty? There's this quote, I forgot the exact quote, something about like one person dying is a travesty, like 1 million people dying are a statistic. We have the same illusion of perception with people's death and injustice as we seem to have with sound, where the actual physical energy is increasing at an exponential rate, and so the actual physical loss or loss to the world of these functioning human beings, and think about the productivity, creatively, physically, all the love that a human being can provide over the course of their life to others, to themselves, to Look at me. I'm making hours and hours of video and all these poems and everything, and I haven't even sold anything yet. I feel like I'm still on my grind trying to break. I'm still looking for my break and actually start. I'm still looking to start my professional career as an artist. All of this is just me warming up. And I'm just one person. And then you lose a million of me. You lose a million Einsteins, you know, a million, who's someone that people cherish? A million Bob Rosses. A million, a million Mr. Rogers. A million Stan Lees. Stan Lee created so many universes that the internet seems to love him a lot. I think he was a flawed individual who was taken advantage of, and you see these things from the outside. Again, I didn't like college, the military, the culture. I could just kind of have a sense of it. Stan Lee was preyed upon by a lot of people towards the end of his life. You feel like that was a negative culture. Not to say that he created it, but there's something funny going on with that culture. But one individual had a huge outsized impact on the world. When you lose a million individuals for something so silly as the lies and greed of a small group of people, Project for a New American Century, those guys drew up the plan for Iraq, and then Bush executed it with cronies. It should, we don't want people, I don't want people to feel despondent, to feel like the world sucks beyond all redemption. But it should give you pause, and it should blow your mind a little bit. And then you should, I would like to think that you choose somewhere to invest your energies after you decompress it. Again, you don't want people to exercise their emotions out on other people. Or it's good to be passionate, but it's not good to be emotional when you're trying to be effective. Emotions have their place, but we got to unpack them so that way we can be effective. But I feel like I captured a lot of emotions in this, and when I read it, when I try to explain it, I think it comes out that way too. And there's good alliteration in the title, Decibels the War Dead. But we'll see. We'll see how it's received. I haven't really sent this anywhere or done anything with it, but I'm proud of it. And before I sell anything, or when I talk to people, I'm a writer, or I do this and that, things like this make me feel like I'm a writer. Like Amnesty, when I read that, and I'm like, all right, when your own work starts to become your favorite work, when my own songs I like playing, I haven't played my songs in a while. I don't think I'm ever going to put out an album, but some of the songs I made are some of my favorite songs. So this is one of my favorite images, and I'm glad I was able to capture it at that time in my life.